Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. This is David Overos. I'm Director of Product Marketing here at Software AG. And thanks for joining today's webinar, which is called API Clouds for Faster APIs, Leveraging Existing Assets for the API Economy. We're really excited to have Jason Bloomberg participate in today's webinar. Jason is the president of Intellyx and is also a Forbes contributor. And I'll let him tell you a little bit more about himself in a moment. But first, for those of you who may not be that familiar with Software AG, just wanted to tell you a little bit about us before we jump in and talk about today's topic. So if you're not aware of who Software AG is, you're probably aware of many of our brands. Primarily, we're well known for both our Web Methods brand and our Eris brand, as well as Terracotta and Apama. And we're actually used by more than 70% of the Global 1,000 companies around the world. And we have millions of developers and millions of users who use us in lots of different capacities, from integration to API management to business process management to in-memory computing, lots of different things. But today's focus is going to be on API management. And so I'm going to hand the conversation over to Jason to introduce himself and tell you a little bit about what he's going to be talking about today.
Great. Thank you very much, David. So, again, my name is Jason Bloomberg. I'm president of Intellyx, and Intellyx is an industry analyst firm focused on agile digital transformation. So I write for Forbes and a number of contributed blogs, and I also have a biweekly newsletter. My latest book is The Agile Architecture Revolution. So if you could make me presenter so I can advance the slides, then we will do that. Or if somebody could advance the slide for me. I need to be presenter. Hey, folks, I need to be presenter. There we are. Okay, so the discussion begins with the discussion of digital transformation. So this webinar is on API clouds, so we need to talk about APIs as well as the context of cloud computing. But I'm beginning with digital transformation as the starting point, because digital transformation is driving enterprise technology decisions. So what's really the big picture here? Well, the big picture is really a shift in the focus of enterprise IT away from the IT infrastructure, where it has been for so many years, to the customer. And so this is a very important part of the trend, that now customer preferences and behavior are driving enterprise technology decisions. And that is impacting everything that really the entire organization, but in particular the IT shop, is doing. So as a result, it's driving API strategies as well as cloud computing and everything else that is part of this, this story. So I see I'm presenter. Very good. So if you think about this digital context, right, where customer needs are driving enterprise technology decisions, well, the story begins with whatever that customer touch point is, right? The customer wants to interact somehow. They want to, get their online banking balance, or they want to shop on an e-commerce site, or they're, applying for insurance, or whatever that customer is doing. Business to business as well, they're interacting with some sort of a supply chain system, or whatever that interaction is. It begins with the device. So there's some sort of technology touch point that is driving the technology story, right, that begins with the customer. But a key point here, and this is really the comprehensive, the end-to-end story, is that in the enterprise context, the customer needs begin with the device, but it's an end-to-end story, right? So the device all the way to the back-end systems of record and the back office and everything in between, right? So you have the full gamut of enterprise IT, right, including cloud computing, SaaS-based offerings, private cloud, as well as hybrid cloud scenarios, the middleware on-premise, as well as the back-end systems and databases and enterprise applications that are supporting everything that the IT organization does for the business and, by extension, for customers, right? So now we have this end-to-end connect the dots between the customer and the back-end systems of record. And of course, all of that has to work every time, and it has to be very high performance, and it has to have the flexibility necessary to meet shifting customer demands and the dynamic needs of the business as the business responds to competitive pressures and other disruptions in the overall environment. So all of this is part of the broader digital story. So if you think about then what it means to do end-to-end digital, well, we have to think about that front-end story. So that includes not just the human user interface devices, but sensors and controls that are part of the Internet of Things story, and we also have to think about the back-end systems as well as everything in between. So all of this is now part of the digital story. So when you talk about the digital story, in the context of the enterprise, you'll get different perspectives depending upon who you're talking to and what the context of the conversation is. So a lot of digital discussions are driven out of marketing, driven out of the product teams, driven out of the chief digital officer's office, and in many cases those conversations are focused on customer experience issues, which are user interface issues, as well as other customer-related issues. For example, merchandising in a retail establishment is part of the customer experience. But if you talk to enterprise IT folks, well, then the digital story becomes a story of application capabilities and the supporting infrastructure necessary not only to provide access to legacy systems, but also to maintain current application capabilities, so driving new application creation and access. So all of this is now part of the broader digital story, and all of it connects now to the API story as well. So if we think about now what's going on, I mean, again, this is still sort of at the big picture, you can think about many different changes as disruption drives the evolution of technology. So on the left, we have the old days. On the right, we have today. And in the old days, right, from the mid-2000s, we're implementing service-oriented architecture, focusing on building web services. Well, we would spend a lot of time figuring out what web services we need. So we had a relatively small number of user interfaces, very small number of service interfaces. Is very clear in terms of the user interface story. We had maybe web access or flat client access, very limited story. Of course, today, we have an explosion of types of touch points. Not only do we have smartphones, but we have the variety of different types of smartphones as well as the various form factors. We have the Internet of Things, and we have a whole range of different touch points, from automobiles to digital signage, and these are all part of that story. So in the old days, we had centralized middleware, right? If you were trying to build that SOA infrastructure, we would leverage traditional middleware, which was centrally managed, part of traditional IT. Well, today we're more likely to have hybrid cloud integration scenarios. So our integration is now cloud-centric, so we're connecting the cloud to on-premise systems, we're connecting the cloud to other clouds and to other applications running in the cloud or at third-party locations. And now the middleware story, I mean, it's still in the middle in a sense, but it's much more diversified, it's much more fragmented in terms of the various capabilities that middleware has traditionally provided. So the role of IT in the old days was, essentially to govern and manage applications and the supporting infrastructure. So there was this sort of ivory tower context where IT had the keys to the kingdom and would dole out capabilities as appropriate in order to maintain the appropriate governance and security. And that was how we got stuff done. That is how we kept our systems to be highly reliable and provide so meet the needs of the business. Well, now with the new digital world, more likely than not, technology capabilities are being purchased or built outside of IT altogether. This is the rogue IT phenomenon where traditional IT is too slow, it's locking everything down, so the lines of business or marketing groups or whoever it is are going out on the cloud and purchasing application capabilities without necessarily even talking to IT. So mobile apps as well, today's enterprises may have dozens of these and they're scattered across different lines of business, interacting with different customers or employees or other people, and that now becomes this massive governance challenge and as well as an application integration challenge. So the traditional old days, right, we're implementing SOA, implementing web services, and service interfaces are now part of this governed approach for exposing legacy assets. And that's really what we meant by services back in the day, is, well, how are we going to build some sort of loosely coupled access to legacy assets so that we can support our business process and application needs? Well, we still have those kinds of services, but more likely than not, we're having a much wider range of software interfaces. And these are now essentially the current meaning of the word API, application programming interface. That term has been around for many years, but today's context for API is potentially interfaces for internal use, but more often than not, exposing various application capabilities for external use. So it could be for partners, could be for customers, could be for other third parties within the context of either on-premise environment or cloud-based environments. And in many cases, these foster essentially commercial relationships or commercial interactions, which is why we call it the API economy, right? Essentially, APIs become now the representation of all the capabilities enterprises bring to the table, whether it's supporting customer experience directly or indirectly via third parties or other application capabilities. So the API economy is now essentially this digital fragmentation version of the way we used to think, say, 10, 15 years ago, where we were building very carefully locked down software interfaces. Well, today we're just not locking anything down, right? It's a full explosion of different kinds of interfaces to support a whole variety of different needs in a very dynamic, customer-driven way. So it's taking, it's moving that center of gravity, right? It's not about the IT infrastructure. IT infrastructure is playing a supporting role. It's really about the customer, right? So it's a customer perspective on these software interfaces, looking at it from the consumer side as well instead of from the provider side. So this API economy, right? We have APIs for internal corporate use, but even within the context, within the confines of the enterprise, it's not a question of locking them down. It's a question of making that word economy that might suggest a commercial relationship. It may still be APIs internal to the organization. Of course, there are also APIs for partners and third-party services, and there's a full explosion of those. So there's any number of different kinds of third-party services. If you look at essentially any enterprise corporate web page, you might have 30, 40, 50 plugins, right? There'd be the widgets and the tags and third-party services that are included in that page, and all of those are essentially accessed via APIs of different sorts. So this is all part of the broader context of how enterprises provide technology capabilities to their full audience, customers, partners, et cetera. And then, of course, APIs support all the variety of touch points, right? So the mobile apps, the tablets, Internet of Things interfaces, and all of this is now essentially driven by APIs. So APIs, fundamentally, they're software interfaces, right? They fall in between the consumer of the capability or the data and the provider of the capability or the data. So I like to liken them to the glue that holds the digital world together, right? It's because we have a much more mature approach for building software interfaces that is more loosely coupled than the web services of old, much more likely to be restful, lightweight, easy to understand, easy to consume, easy to discover. These now become the currency or the glue that holds the digital world together, right? Because there's so many different things going on and so many different parties that are involved in interacting. The APIs really form that glue that holds the whole story together. So it's an important part of the API story, right? A lot of times people talk about APIs as though they were the whole world, right? But you can't talk about glue without talking about what you're gluing together, right? So you have to talk about your existing IT assets, your application capabilities, and you also, in particular, have to talk about who's consuming these things, the customers and third parties who are interacting with enterprises on a software basis via APIs. So part of the value now of building an API strategy is to extend the enterprise reach. And this is a key part of the modern digital story, right? The shift from IT being the ivory tower holding the keys to the kingdom, doling out capabilities in little bits and dribs and drabs, to IT as being an enabler of self-service capabilities. Well, how do you enable self-service capabilities across your organization and among customers and other parties parties? Well, you do it via APIs, right? So you leverage APIs. You, as in anybody now, can leverage APIs to create their own applications, to mash things up, so to combine data sources to solve problems. So today's business intelligence tools, for example, are mashing up data via APIs, and supporting new devices as well, because of course the list of technology touch points continues to grow explosively. So there's always new ones being added to the list. It also opens up new channels in terms of ways people interact with organizations. So new ways of accessing corporate data and corporate services that are all part of the enterprise ability to provide corporate assets that provide value to the full extended enterprise, customers, partners, employees, and everybody else that a large organization is serving. So this brings us to the story of the API cloud. So yes, it's running in the cloud and it's about APIs, but really the idea is that we have this API economy that is driving both consumption and the provision of software-based services and data across the organization. So somewhere in the middle there is this marketplace or portal or broker capability, and all of these terms are all aspects of this notion of API cloud. So you can think of it as a marketplace where there's actually commerce being done. You may have some sort of auction system, or pick a API off a list and pay for it. So it could be a true marketplace in that sense, or it could be more of a portal which has more of an internal enterprise context where you have a range of different APIs available with all of the associated information and other metadata that facilitates the selection and integration with the APIs. Or it could be more of a broker where you have some sort of active role where APIs are made available depending upon particular requirements or the context of a desired interaction. So all of this is part of the story. Of course, all of it has to be secure. All of it has to be properly governed in the context of appropriate regulations and other constraints. And it has to be managed for not just security and governance, but for performance, as well as the broad-based compliance with the requirements of the business. And of course, you want to put this in the cloud. You could put it on-premise if you wanted to, but there's no reason why you can't think of this notion of an API portal in the cloud. And that's essentially what we mean by an API cloud. We want to abstract out how we deploy it. It doesn't really matter where we actually install this thing. What matters is that we have these API marketplace brokerage capabilities that are available not just within the organization, but anywhere and everywhere we need them to be available. So that's pretty much my story. I will advance the slide, and then I will hand it over to David. So David, take it away.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jason. And you just kind of pick up where you left off. You were talking about an API brokerage or marketplace. You talk with a lot of customers. You talk with a lot of different people and different businesses, and I'm sure you're seeing a lot of demand, especially these days. It's pretty hot in terms of what people are trying to do in the API space, interestingly, both internally and externally. I have the same experience when I talk with our customers and I talk with different people in the industry. A lot of companies are looking to provide a portal or a starting place to access their APIs, and in many cases they're doing so internally first, and then they're turning around and exposing that to their external customers and partners. So at Software AG, what we're doing to address this market is we just launched a Web Methods API Cloud, which is it's really just an API portal. It's hosted in the cloud by Software AG. One of the reasons why that's really important to us and what it's important to many of the customers we work with is they really want to get up and running quickly. So if you have a lot of services that you've built in the past, you have a lot of data that you want to make available, whether it's internally or externally, you want to be able to put up the sort of the gateway to that very quickly if possible. And so that's one of the reasons why we offer our portal as a cloud service. It is a hybrid solution, though. It works. You could actually install our portal on premises if you want to. As Jason says, you could go either way, but by installing it on premises, you trade off maybe some security aspects, or you trade off some more control over, time to market and speed. So those are things that you want to keep in mind. Our API cloud is specifically, I shouldn't say specifically, it's actually pretty well integrated with our on-premises capabilities for managing both the life cycle of an API as well as our security gateway. So that's a little bit about our API portal. Specifically, what it is we do. Our API cloud, as Jason talked about, rapid deployment of APIs, but certain things you need to make sure you take into account if you put out this kind of a portal. You want it to look like your company. It's very important that your portal represents you and your business and your brand. So you want to make sure that you can customize that to have the look and feel and interaction with your customers and partners, so that they have that added sense of trust that they know who you are and you're kind of a known agent. Another thing that's important, and it's particularly important with some of the customers that we've worked with, is you not only want to be able to support those RESTful APIs, but a lot of companies have invested over many years either in SOA-type web service infrastructure, or they just have existing legacy systems, and they might be able to expose something quickly as a web service or as a REST service, and you really want to be able to support whatever kind of internal services that are available to you to get them up and running quickly. So not all portals are the same, and so sometimes you want to make sure that you can support those legacy systems that most of the companies I talk to have in place today. Other things that are important are documentation, so your developing community, your partners know exactly what to expect from your API. You want to be able to test it directly within your API cloud. And of course, you need the ability to have monitoring and community and all those types of things. But you also want to be able to import APIs directly from, say, a Swagger or a RAML type definition. So all of those things are kind of key components of our Web Methods API cloud. And additionally, like I mentioned before, we provide seamless integration with our existing Web Methods products and our CentralSite product to support the full spectrum of the lifecycle management. We talked about, as the lead into this webinar, what if I want to leverage my existing assets for the API economy? Well, that's one of the reasons why the API portal is so important, because you want to be able to get the portal up and running quickly, and if it's hosted in the cloud and you don't have to worry about installing and deploying and everything, it's just a matter of configuring your tenant and, pulling that data in to define your APIs. That gets you up and running quickly, because in most cases, companies are looking to APIify, in a sense, turn their existing data and services into APIs from those legacy systems. Like I said a moment ago as well, I cannot overestimate the importance of supporting not just RESTful services, but also SOAP-based web services, because the likelihood is that many companies have a lot of infrastructure in place. They may have started a SOA initiative some years ago, and these services are still available, and you want to make those available not only internally but externally if you can, as quickly as possible. But you don't want to be limited to that, so you also want to be able to bring in newly defined services, whether you document those as like a Swagger format or a RAML definition. So just to give you a little bit broader perspective on what Software AG offers, we've focused mostly on our API cloud, which is the portal component. But Software AG does offer the full spectrum, everything from providing those back-end services themselves with our Web Methods integration platform to managing the lifecycle of those APIs. We do that through our CentralSite product. We also have a gateway, Web Methods Enterprise Gateway for security concerns, and those all work together as our integrated API platform. Software AG, just to wrap up my portion of this before we open it up, if we have any, by the way, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer your questions. You can enter them into the Q&A window if you want to, and we'll try to answer any questions we get in just a moment. But just to wrap up my portion of it, why Software AG? Well, I think one of the clear differentiators for Software AG and what we do in the API space is that we have one single platform where we can build, run, and expose your APIs, whether those are internal APIs, whether those are external APIs. And because of our unique ability to integrate with CentralSite, we can eliminate the process of re-documenting your APIs. So if you've developed web services or RESTful services and you have those stored in CentralSite, whenever you expose those to the API cloud, those carry with it the full documentation about those APIs, so you don't have to re-document, which saves you a lot of time. Also, our solution supports both RESTful and SOAP APIs, and we provide end-to-end analytics from everything from the design time, where you can monitor your APIs and usage through the portal, so you know exactly what your development community and your partners are accessing, what they're testing, where they're located, and all of those elements are really important for as you seek to perhaps productize your APIs. As Jason said earlier, if you have a marketplace where you expose these APIs to a broader community and you want to monetize those, it's really important to treat them like a product. And if you're going to do that, then you need to understand usage and demand of that product. And so having analytics at that design time level is crucial. And of course, it's also important to have analytics and full monitoring at the runtime level as well. And Software AG provides that kind of across the spectrum. We have a lot of great customers using us for API management, everybody from Kiabi, who's a retailer in France, to Outerwall, which runs the Redbox and Coinstar kiosks, to major logistics companies like Kuehne + Nagel. So we've got a lot of customers in this space, a lot of successful implementations. If you enjoyed this and you learned something about API management and you want to learn even more, in addition to asking questions at the end of the webinar, we have a number of different places you can go to get additional information on what Software AG is doing in the API space. You can visit our website at webmethodscloud.com/API. That'll take you right to our Web Methods Cloud API Cloud portal. We have a white paper, API Management for a Digital World, which was written by our guest, Jason Bloomberg, and you can learn more about kind of a broader discussion on this topic of API management in the digital economy. And then we have some actual product demos. We didn't focus on our product so much today, but every Wednesday we have a series of webinars at Software AG where we focus on Web Methods product demonstrations. That's the primary purpose. And I've done a number of those on our API management platform and our API cloud, and you can see those if you just visit our channel, Software AG, at the youtube.com site. You can look that up. And you can also see here we have a number of them are scheduled in the coming weeks every Wednesday. We'd be happy to hear from you if you have any questions. You can contact me. My information is here, david.overos@softwareag.com. And I'm sure Jason would be glad to hear from you as well. He's jason@Intellyx.com. And with that, I'm going to check to see if we have any Q&A. I don't see any questions in the Q&A window.
So David, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So you talked about the API cloud product, and we talked a bit about API management, and that's I wrote that white paper on API management. So do customers need like two different products, API management and API cloud, or does API cloud include management? I mean, what kind of overlap is there?
Well, that's a really good question. So I know I went through it kind of quickly because we were focused mostly on the cloud. So at Software AG, we have kind of a hybrid solution. So we have an API portal product that you can run on premises, and that's the Web Methods API portal. But we offer essentially the same portal capabilities as a cloud-hosted service, and that's MyMethods API Cloud. That can be run standalone, so you don't need any other products from Software AG to be able to use and run our API portal, right? Whether it's on the cloud or on-premises. However, as I mentioned, we have a full spectrum, right? So we have everything from the security gateway that runs in the DMZ to an on-premises component where we can manage the life cycle. So any and all of those pieces are sold separately. Many of our customers like to use the whole platform, because if you use CentralSite to manage, say, policies and the life cycle of your APIs, and then you document your APIs there in one centralized location, then you can easily promote that to the cloud just by configuring which APIs you want to have available, and then those, you don't have to document them again in the portal. So, and one of the reasons that we did it that way is because we have a lot of customers who've used some of these products for many, many years, and for our customers who may have spent some time and resources building out a service-oriented architecture program in the past, for example, we made it really super easy for them to get up and running quickly, right? Because we believe that one of the biggest challenges for any kind of program like this is getting buy-in from the business, and for getting, just being able to prove it out. So by making it as an extension, we're tightly integrated with CentralSite, we make it possible for our existing customers to really roll out something very quickly, if just to prove it out to the stakeholders within the organization. And actually, that's probably an interesting question back to you, because what do you see in terms of the people you talk to in terms of wanting to get a program up and running quickly and getting buy-in not only from the IT department, but from the business?
You mean an API program in particular?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it should be driven by business needs, right? It's not like, it's not like, IT or the folks in IT are like, Mickey Rooney saying, hey, let's put on a show. Hey, let's build some APIs and put on a program, right? It's not driven out of IT. It should be driven out of the business, which essentially means customer priorities. So it depends upon the needs of the various lines of business of what they're trying to accomplish. So, so sometimes it has to do with, internal employee business needs. So, for example, you have a Salesforce, and different people across the organization have different access to it, and you have other apps like that may be cloud-based or maybe on-premise, and you want to pull them all together, and you're building essentially an enterprise app store. So this is a way of facilitating those kind of capabilities, where they could be just downloadable apps, or they could be APIs that are now available for different groups to interact with programmatically. Other cases, it's customer-driven, right? You have a specific customer need. For example, you have third-party mobile apps that you're supporting as part of what you're trying to accomplish, and as a result, those may drive an API program. So you don't start by asking, whether you want to do a program. You start by asking, well, what are the problems we're trying to solve here?
Yeah.
APIs can facilitate so many different things. It's really an open-ended question.
Well, and I realize that, and where I was going with the question was not so much whether we should have an API program, right? And that, obviously that needs to be driven by the business, because we really see, well, at least for our external-facing APIs, the whole goal is in some way to build either community for your business, or market share, or revenue directly. So those are all business-type decisions, but obviously the IT provides a service to the business, and they need to be able to prove out what they can do. And so I think where I was going with that question was more around how can customers kind of prove out different solutions quickly to the business. And by making it as easy as possible, hosting it as a cloud solution, it makes it a lot easier for you to go and demonstrate very quickly that you can provide those services, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So I did get a couple of questions in the chat window, and some of them, well, most of them look like they're more towards software AGs than they are kind of general speaking. So I'll answer them. Do you enable SOAP web services to be exposed to external customers? The answer is yes. The API Cloud provides, well, let me back up. So Web Methods has for many, many years been available to provide web services. And so there's like the runtime aspect of it and then the design time aspect of it. Our API Cloud is really providing that, that documentation, the front end, the ability to request security access, to be able to call those web services publicly. But we've been supporting public-facing web services for a number of years. But the API portal provides support on both sides of REST and SOAP for documentation and testing and that sort of thing. Another question I have here is about microservices. There's a lot of movement in the industry towards microservices. How does your product support this? So I'm gonna shy away a little bit from that because I'm not an expert on microservices. We do support microservices in general within our integration platform, and to us it's less of a specifically an API issue and more of an architecture issue. We do have a we do have a white paper that we just published that's pretty extensive about microservices, and you're welcome to check that out on our website. But I don't want to try to cover that too briefly here because it's a little bit off topic for this webinar. There's a question in here specifically about MuleSoft. I don't like to talk about competitors so much on my website, on our webinars, but I just want to acknowledge that the question was there. Obviously, we're in a competitive space with MuleSoft. We offer kind of a broader offering than MuleSoft, but I don't want to go into kind of a feature-by-feature comparison. But obviously, Software AG provides everything from the integration layer to the API lifecycle layer to the portal layer. And so there. Another question. How different are SOAP, SOA, and API management initiatives really? Sometimes it seems just protocol and REST versus SOAP. I could talk about that, but I'd love to have Jason talk a little bit about that because I have my perspective on it, but I bet Jason has probably seen a lot of conversations on that topic.
Yeah, so the question is really asking about management, but perhaps the more interesting question has to do with these marketplaces as well, because they are related questions. But in terms of management, you know, you're quite right that essentially API management is an ongoing maturation of what we used to call SOA management. And in fact, we used to call it Web Services Management before that. And it shifted names quite frequently. It was Web Services Management, then SOA Management, then Runtime SOA Governance, and now we call it API management. So in terms of the product category, I mean, there's been maturation due to the ongoing maturation of the various technology approaches. API is not exactly the same thing as a service. It's related, you know, web services have APIs as well as additional metadata in addition to the programmatic interface. Today's APIs are much more likely to be RESTful, so API management today often focuses on what it takes to manage RESTful interactions, so has more of an HTTP centricity to it than we did back in the days, which was more middleware centric. But as David mentioned, you know, the APIs that the API Cloud deals with could be RESTful or could be SOAP-based. So you can treat a web service essentially as a type of API in the context of this marketplace. So in terms of marketplaces, I remember back in the day, you know, 2003, 2004, there were a number of web services marketplaces cropping up, both for internal use as well as for third-party use. And, you know, we struggled to get those to work properly. And a lot of the challenges had to do with the challenges of web services, right? The vendor implementations weren't always compatible, and there were issues with how to format your data and all sorts of technical limitations that made seamless marketplaces for web services very practical. So today, because we've learned a lot of lessons over the last 10 to 12 years, you know, the APIs are more likely to be RESTful, data formats are often JSON formatted, and we understand how to work with that. It's not like everything is perfect. There are still incompatibilities and issues of, you know, dynamic schemas and, you know, other issues, but we've made a lot of progress, right? We're not just repeating the future, but you can still see a real, you know, evolutionary connection between the web services marketplaces as well as the web service and SOA market segments, you know, from 10 years ago, and API management and the API cloud stories of today. You know, this is an evolutionary process that we're seeing.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, and I think you're absolutely right, because I remember those early web service marketplaces as well, and I remember them as they systematically shut down because it just was not a successful program, right? But I think one of the key differences is the end result is like a service that somebody can use, and it seems like it's basically the same solution to a problem. But also keep in mind that SOA had a big emphasis on upfront, like, architectural planning, right? And I think one of the, you know, IT people continue to refine and evolve solutions, and one of the keys here was, you know, maybe businesses didn't want to spend as much time on the upfront planning and you know, kind of handshake between different organizations that were going to use services. They just wanted to get things done. And so I think that when we see more contemporary API programs, it's people just getting things done and spending a little bit less time on the design time aspects up front. And I think that that's proven pretty successful because you've seen a lot more adoption from companies who are doing APIs today. Let's see. There's another question in here about API enablement. Does API enablement switching back to point-to-point way of interactions and going away from ESB frameworks? That's a really interesting question, and it's one that I have I've come across multiple times, right? Because if you think of the new patterns, right, whether it's internal or external, but I think this is more commonly an internal problem, because I've seen companies that are essentially moving away from a traditional ESB approach and closer to everything is an API approach to integration. And is that a dangerous practice? Because in effect, aren't you just creating point-to-point spaghetti again, which is the whole problem that integration has been trying to solve for the last 15 years. And I think that there's definitely the danger there. If you give people enough rope, they will definitely take the opportunity to hang themselves with it, especially if you don't provide any governance. So one of the things about what Software AG does to handle that is we do provide that governance layer for really understanding who's consuming your APIs. Because at the end of the day, the danger is something changes and there's a ripple effect, right? You break one thing, you break 10 things or 100 things or some unmeasurable number of things because you don't really know. So the most important thing is to have visibility into the dependencies between your APIs and who's consuming them. And that is something that Software AG takes very seriously, and that's one of the key use cases of our CentralSite product. So yeah, you put your finger on a potential problem, and you definitely need to be careful. I mean, the same is going to be true for microservices, but then again, that's an architectural approach that is a little bit different, where you have freestanding services that need to fill to the capacity that's going to be using them, but it's a slightly different problem. Jason, what do you think on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, I'll chime in on that as well. There are a couple of issues here that are sort of being mixed together. I mean, on the one hand, it's not really a question of point-to-point versus ESB. I mean, it's true that ESBs helped resolve some point-to-point integrations, but the real story that we were struggling with in the SOA days was how to compose services, right? How to link services together to build applications, or essentially to support business processes. And the story that we ended up with back in the ESB days is that we had to do that on the ESB, right? So we had our Beeple engine or whatever it was, or process tooling, and a process tool integrated with the ESB that handled the message flows and the underlying management. And it was difficult to get that to work properly because we didn't have the level of maturity necessary to support flexible processes, right? In order to build, compositions of services that would do what we wanted them to do. There were just too many technical limitations with the standards that we had, with the nature of services, and with the middleware that was supporting all of this. So in many ways, that was one of the big failures of first-generation SOA, is even though we talked a good game about composing services to support flexible processes and to build applications, in large part, that was too difficult to achieve in practice. So the question now is, well, have we made any progress with that? And in many ways we have, right, because we no longer have the heavyweight, we're not relying upon heavyweight middleware, we're moving to more RESTful solutions. But you still have to ask yourself, well, how do we compose RESTful APIs? And there's still not a good broadly applicable answer to that will meet everybody's needs. Right? We have ways of building applications that leverage APIs, but there's no particular rule to how to do that doesn't just fall into the point-to-point trap. Now, if you look at what REST was supposed to have been, if you look at Roy Fielding and what he, the inventor of REST, and what he was trying to get at was a way of building hypermedia systems. Well, hypermedia systems are essentially RESTful APIs interconnected into a hypermedia application. In large part, people haven't actually implemented that in practice. Right? Most of what REST is an API style. It's not a hypermedia application style. So one question is, well, did we miss the boat there, right? Maybe we just weren't mature enough to build hypermedia applications, and as we move to containers and microservices, perhaps we'll come up with better ways of composing microservices that won't lead to this point-to-point problem, and maybe hypermedia will answer that question. But I don't think that there's really a broad understanding of how best to compose microservices today. So this is an open question, right? We could very well fall into this point-to-point problem with microservices. And yes, the container infrastructure, if we get that right, abstracts out, the management of microservices, and it should abstract out the elastic scalability, right, with the one instance versus several instances. That should be something we don't have to worry about. But how we're going to build applications out of what are now very parsimonious microservices. They only do one little thing, right? So they're not a whole application. They're just one little bit of capability, and that's all a microservice is supposed to do. We're going to have to build applications by stringing a lot of them together, and I don't think we really have figured out the best way to do that yet. So that's a work in progress, and you'll find a lot of discussion about that, but I don't think we have the answers yet. So, but what I like to say, there's a lot of confusion out there, but I love confusion. It gives me something to write about.
Yeah, we love confusion too. I mean, it gives us gives us problems to solve, and definitely if you just following in this space, there's just a lot of people are talking about a lot of different initiatives that are all kind of loosely coupled together, and like you said, when people are talking about some of these topics, they're not necessarily talking about the same thing, and so yeah. We got one other question here that I want to touch on. The question was, is the service registry still used for API management? When I talked about the software AG's specific, like what we do, we have a platform that contains multiple components, right? And we have our philosophy is today, and our philosophy has been, since the beginning of when we created Web Methods 15 years ago. We like our products to be tightly integrated, but loosely coupled. So in this case, we have a tightly integrated service registry with Centrasite that is a key component of our API platform. But as I said before, it's not a mandatory component. So we have customers that use us just for the portal component. We have customers that use us just for the gateway component or just for the registry component. And then we have customers that use all of them in combination. So there's different ways that these can be handled, but obviously we want to make those things available to you because if you're a company that, for example, that has invested in SOA in the past, well then it makes sense to have a strong service registry that is tightly coupled in with your API management solution. So I'm checking my list of questions here. I think that's all the questions I have. Jason, was there anything else you wanted to touch on before we signed off?
No, I think we pretty much covered it.
I agree. I think we got some great questions. I really appreciate you joining us on the webinar. It's always a pleasure to have you here with us. It always helps give our customers a little bit kind of broader understanding from, other thought leaders in the industry, which is great. And hopefully some of the people that follow you were able to join and learn a little bit about Software AG. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you very much for joining the webinar, and I hope you have a great day.